excited to be here. As he said, I'm Danae McBride. My husband Steve and I moved down here about a year and a half ago. Most recently from North Ogden, and before that we were up in the Bay Area. Have 4 children that were born there, and they're all grown and scattered all over. So I've shared some of these stories to family and friends here and there, but I've never put it together like in a whole presentation until my husband volunteered me for our own Empty Nesters about a month ago. And it was actually kind of fun to go down memory lane and look at some of the old pictures and kind of reflect and stuff. Keep in mind, this is my perspective of my life as a child. I'm not a historian, I don't claim to be. So these are just some of my thoughts and recollections and some family heritage and stuff. And so originally I was going to, the first presentation, I was just going to focus on when I lived in Iran as a junior high age kid. And then as I thought about it, I decided I wanted to go back a little bit further into my parents and grandparents and talk about some of their experiences, because I felt like it kind of tied in. My mom was born and raised in East Germany, and so I felt like some of the things that happened to her and what happened in East Germany and Iran, that you kind of saw some similarities when it came to what happens when good people don't do anything and allowed minority kind of take over and force change and force evil. So to start off, I want to introduce my grandparents. This is Arno Siertzon and Margaret Scharschmidt. They were the cutest little German grandparents. So they were born and raised in Germany. Arno was a great athlete. He excelled in pretty much every sport he tried. He was a great gymnast. He was a great soccer player, but his real love was track and field. So much so that he was in the 1936 Olympic team for Germany. This is when they were in Berlin, and Hitler wanted to show the world Germany's supremacy. And so because of that, the athletes were exempt from being soldiers, at least in the beginning of the war. And so that was kind of a blessing for him. So since he didn't have to be a soldier, he was able to be a missionary in Germany during World War II. And so while all the other Americans were leaving, they're down at the train station whistling, trying to find each other, if you've heard that story, trying to get out of the country before the borders closed. He was a missionary in Germany. And so these are just some of my favorite pictures of him reading his scriptures on his mission. There he is with some of the other elders at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. So that was pretty cool. So as his mission was, he knew it was coming to a close at some point, and so he started thinking about next steps. And so after you get married, after you finish your mission, you get married, right? He wanted a nice LDS wife, raise his family in the gospel. He didn't have any prospects, so he started to pray about it. And as he prayed, he had a vision of this lovely young lady, but he didn't recognize her. And then one day his companion showed him a picture that he just got of his family. And there was a girl that wasn't his sister, but was raised in his home as his sister. And he saw the picture, and it was the girl of his dreams. And so after his mission, the companion invited him to come to a church activity. He got to meet the young lady, and the rest is history, right? They ended up getting married. This is their wedding picture. As you see, later he was in the Navy, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But for Oma, in Germany at this time, single women were required to work in the factories. And so that's what she did for a while. But once she was married, she was no longer required to do that, because the priority is more to stay home and have babies. But she didn't have any babies yet. Opa was doing his soldier thing, she was by herself. So she actually got to be a missionary also. As a married woman, she was a missionary in Germany during World War II, and that's a picture of her and her companion while she was a missionary. So that was pretty neat. So Opa, when he was a soldier, luckily for him, he was stationed in the admiral's office, and so that meant he didn't have to be a soldier out in the field and in the trenches and stuff. So that was a blessing. Being in the admiral's office, a lot of papers would come across his desk. A lot of those papers had lists of people, lists of Jewish people, lists of POWs that had been captured, lists of enemies of the state, things like that. And he figured out what those lists meant. And so whenever possible, he made those lists disappear. And by his record, he's probably pretty humble on keeping track of it, but he thinks that he saved at least 5,000 people's lives by making these lists disappear. I think it always bothered him that he couldn't save them all, but he did what he could. So that was always kind of a neat heritage, knowing that he risked doing that to save these people. So during the war, he was up north at the admiral's office. His wife was living by herself. Every once in a while, he would get a couple-day leave pass, and when he did, Oma would travel up to see him, and they would have picnics by the lake or go up in the mountains and stuff, and have a nice time. And I guess about 9 months after one of those trips, my Aunt Ilka was born. And so Oma was then back at her home by herself when she had her baby and raising her little baby alone. And at one point, Russia started to invade Germany, and everybody had heard about the Russian soldiers and were quite fearful for them. Russian soldiers were known to burn down homes, farms, your crops, kill any animals or livestock you might still have, rape the women, kill innocent children and people. So everyone was pretty afraid when the Russians started coming in. One day while Oma was by herself, there was some pounding on the door, and she opens it to see a bunch of Russian soldiers. So she quietly said a silent prayer for the safety of herself and her little baby. As the soldiers came into her home, little baby Ilka cried, and one of the soldiers asked her, "Do you have a baby?" And she said, "Yes, can I go get her to calm her down?" And the soldier said, "Go get your baby, we're leaving." And they turned around and left. So that was a blessing for her that she was quite grateful for. As the war progressed, my mom was born spring of 45, so shortly after, later that year, the war ended. For anybody who knew Opa, if he had been able to get home when that war ended, he would have been there as soon as he could to see his sweet wife and little daughters. But there's a gap in time between when the war ended and when he was able to get home. And he never liked to talk about that time period. So it's kind of widely speculated that he was a prisoner of war for a while the Allies tried to figure out who the good Germans and the bad Germans were. So there was that kind of that gap in time that's what we think happened. But eventually he did make it home. And then my Uncle Holger was born shortly after, so a couple years later. As you know, in Germany, after the war, the country was divided into 4 quadrants. And one of those being governed by Russia, and they turned it into a communist country called East Germany. Unfortunately for my family, that's where they lived. So life in East Germany was very hard. They no longer had the freedoms that they were used to, that they had before the war. Everything was controlled. People spied on you, watched you, reported you. Everything was censored. Your job, what kind of job you had, any promotions you received, was determined by the government, and often related to if you were part of the Communist Party. For the school children, how much schooling you got, what type of schooling and education you received, also controlled by the government and based upon if you were in the Youth Communist Party. So when my mom was in grade school, she said if the school class had 100% enrollment in the Youth Communist Party, that class got to wear a cute yellow kerchief instead of the ugly regular one. Every year, she was the only one in her class that did not enroll in the Communist Party. So a lot of peer pressure that way. In West Germany, the children were learning English as their second language. That obviously wouldn't make sense for East Germany, so she got to learn Russian, as that was their second language to learn. But that actually ended up kind of being fun because our oldest son went to Russia on his mission, and our youngest one went to Ukraine, Russian speaking. And so she was very proud of herself that she knew a few phrases and little poem and things that she would say to them, so that was kind of cute. But the life was pretty hard, but they were good, strong members of the church and did the best they could with what they had. Opa was the branch president of their little branch there, and it wasn't uncommon for him to get picked up and taken into police headquarters and questioned and interrogated about church activities and who was attending church and just what was going on. And so Oma would be home with her children and have dinner ready, and her husband didn't show up, and she didn't know when he was coming home, if he was coming home, because sometimes people just disappeared. It happened there. And so that was pretty stressful. Oma, both of them, but especially Oma, always felt like she was supposed to raise her children in Zion, in Utah. And as things were getting worse and worse, and she kept thinking, like, how are we supposed to make this happen? She felt like it was supposed to, but they didn't know. There wasn't any easy answers. And so they started fasting and praying pretty heavily about this as a family. And one day they got a knock on their door, and it was a guy who had used to be in their ward or their branch before the war, and he was now living in West Germany, but he had come to East Germany on a business trip. And he had visited another family and asked them, is there anybody else in the area that I might know? And they said, yeah, the Sirtson family lives up just the way. So he came to visit them, and they felt prompted to share with him their desire to go to West Germany. And they told him, they said, well, we have an uncle that lives in West Germany, but we can't just write a letter and say, hey, can you help us escape? Because everything's censored. So they're like, we don't know how to get word to him and let him know what we want to do. And this guy said, well, I'd be happy to help. Who's your cousin? And they told him the name, and he just smiled, and he's like, he's in my branch. I know him well. He lives really close to me, so I will personally talk to him and find out if he's willing and able to help you. And so they made a plan, and they decided that if the cousin was able to help, that the cousin was going to send them a wedding invitation to his daughter's upcoming wedding. So a little while later, they get the wedding invitation in the mail. So check, first steps done. Okay, now we got to figure out, we know he's able to help, but now we got to figure out how to get out of the country. At that point, on kind of maybe rare occasions, very special circumstances, East Germany was allowing some people permission to leave. It was pretty rare for this to happen, but it was with that hope that they made an appointment, and they went on the scheduled day. The children were very well practiced and rehearsed in what they were to say, because they knew that they would probably be separated, and with the soldiers asking them questions to try to get them to confess something or just to trick them up. So they were very practiced. They went, they had the wedding invitation, and they told them, you know, that we really, really, really want to go to this wedding. We haven't seen them since before the war. They've never seen our children. We haven't met their children, so we really want to go. And this bored soldier like barely even looks up, and he just stamps denied on their papers. And they were just crestfallen. Like, they've been fasting and praying. This was supposed to be their answer. They don't have a plan B, and they're just they were just shocked. And just then, in comes a higher ranking commander, and he asked, you know, what was going on. The soldier told him, and he looks across the room and he sees my Oma, and he recognizes her as a classmate from grade school. And he says, they're good people, let them go. And so with those simple words, they now had the permission to leave the country. So what a blessing for them. So now the logistics. You can't just call up the moving company and say, come pack up our stuff. Nobody knows that they're not coming back. They have permission to go for like 3 days for this wedding, so we're not hiring U-Hauls or movers or anything. You can't tell anybody. what your real plans are, because you don't know who you can trust. You don't know who's willing to betray you, turn you in order to get a better apartment or a job promotion or whatever other favor that they want. So when my mom said goodbye to her lifelong best friend, her friend thought she was, going to be back in school in a few days. She couldn't tell her. They couldn't tell the branch members. They couldn't tell their friends and neighbors that they weren't coming back after this wedding. So at this point, my mom's about 11 years old. Her sister's 13 and her brother was 9. So that part was kind of hard. They also could only have like one small suitcase per person, because again, they're only supposed to be gone for a few days. And the government controls how much money, like they limit how much money you're able to take with you when you leave the country, so that it's just enough for those few days. The night before they were supposed to go, they went over to Oma's parents' home, and they told them what was really going on. And my mom and Oma always talked about that was the hardest goodbye. When they said goodbye, they didn't know if they would ever see them again in this life. They assumed they wouldn't. But my great-grandparents gave their blessing because they wanted their grandchildren to have a better life, and they knew they couldn't get that if they stayed in East Germany. So after that tearful goodbye, the next morning is the big day. So they head to the border crossing. It's going to be a long day, long waits. Again, the children are practiced in case they're quizzed. I mean, they were. And so a long day, a lot of nervous excitement. Anything can go wrong at the border. There could be a glitch in the paperwork or who knows what. So they're excited, they're hopeful, but also a little nerves there too. My mom tells the story that she had this old, as she put it, an old ugly hand-me-down jacket, this coat, that she did not like this coat. And in her mind, as soon as she got to West Germany, she was going to get a new coat. And so she kind of just kept casually like laying it around, while they were waiting their turn. And forgot to mention this part. So when I mentioned how Oma always felt like she was supposed to raise her family in East Germany, she actually named my mom Uta, which is a common enough German name, UTA, but it always reminded her of Utah. And that's also my middle name, Uta. But so at the border crossing, my mom's leaving her jacket wherever, and so Oma's like, Uta, where's your coat? Where's your coat, Uta? Uta, we'll get your coat. And my mom's like, why does she care about this old, ugly coat? Like, really? Well, she didn't know her mom had sewn their meager life savings into the lining of the coat. And she didn't want to tell my mom because she didn't want her like clutching at it and acting nervous and suspicious. And she thought my mom was the more responsible of the three, so that's why it was in her coat. So Oma's about having a heart attack that their life savings might be just left somewhere. And so luckily, the coat and the family made it across the border.
Oh, what year was that?
I'd have to do the math on that. I'll have to think about that one. My mind's going blank.
Yeah.
I
Sure.
should know that.
56?
So they ended up in West Germany. They lived in an apartment above the church there, and life was really good in West Germany. First off, they could speak the language still, so that's a plus. Opa found a job immediately as an accountant there. That was a good paying job. The children were thriving in school. They were making new friends. The branch welcomed them with open arms and just loved them and wanted them to stay, kind of encouraged them to stay. And for a minute, they were kind of tempted. But my grandparents, especially Oma, said, we fasted and prayed for a way to be made open to go to Zion. We did not fast and pray to go to West Germany, so we need to go. And so once they got their sponsorship, everything came through that way. About a year later, they headed off to America. There's the boat that they sailed on, and my mom and her parents always talked about seeing the Statue of Liberty for the first time and what that meant to them. It was a pretty neat thing for her. So So here's my mom when she was about 17, 18 years old. So she went to West High in Salt Lake, and she learned English pretty quickly and got caught up on that and was a great student and got a full scholarship to go to BYU. But her parents, her mom could not handle the thought of her being so far away. And so she stayed home and got a job at Zions First National Bank. And then the other one on the right side, that's my beach bum dad. And so some people have asked, well, how did this beautiful German refugee and this beach bum from Hawaii meet? Well, short story on that one is, so my dad was actually born and raised, well, born in Salt Lake, to a kind of a prominent family. They had a beautiful home up above in the avenues, and his parents took a trip to Hawaii. Before it was even a state, it was still just a territory, but they went to Hawaii and they loved it so much they came back and said, we're moving the whole family to Hawaii. So off they went. So he was there at grade school age, and it was a great place for a rambunctious, active boy to be raised. Lots of adventures for him. He was the oldest of 8. One year, he broke his arm 3 times. And nowadays you'd be worrying about child abuse or something, but back then they thought that was hilarious, and somebody at the newspaper found out about it, and they came and interviewed him, took his picture. There's a picture of him in the Honolulu newspaper with him and his little cast, and the 3rd time he fell out of a tree in front of their house, but they asked him, what do you want to be when you grow up? And because of the care he had received when he broke his arm, he said, I want to be a doctor, and that always stuck with him. So that was kind of neat, and set him on his course. And so as he was getting older and he went to public school in Hawaii, which nowadays isn't great, but back then it was even worse, that he started to see the path that some of his friends and some of the older kids were going down. And he realized if he wanted to be a doctor, Hawaii, especially back then, did not have the educational opportunities that he needed to make his dreams come true. So he decided to come back to the mainland and went to University of Utah for his undergrad and then master's. And so then to have the money to do, pay for his education, he had lots of jobs, and one of them was a night job at Zions First National Bank. And so their paths crossed there. He tried to pursue my mom. She thought he was a silly high school punk, not realizing he was actually 6 years older and already getting his master's, but he eventually wore her down, and she agreed to go on a date, and then eventually they ended up getting married in the Salt Lake Temple. And about 10 months after that, I came along, right as my dad was starting med school at the University of Missouri, and he graduated with actually 3 children, but the youngest one apparently was left at home. Maybe she was fussing or something, I don't know. But we spent a lot of time still going back and forth to Hawaii. He did some of his training at Queen's Hospital there in Hawaii. And about this time, it's Vietnam now. And so the draft. So after he graduated, our family went to Fort Lewis in Washington for a year, and then Fort Rucker in Alabama. And then it was time for his big assignment. And for most doctors, that meant going to Nam. And so he kind of looked at that, and he had heard that they also needed doctors in Germany. So my parents okay, he could go to Nam by himself, or could go to Germany, his whole family, and his wife's homeland. So he wants Germany, so that's what he put in for. The military looked at it, and they're like, well, we got a minimum of 2 years. If we send this guy to Nam, we'll get 2 years out of him. Germany is a 3-year commitment. If we send him to Germany, we'll get a doctor for 3 years. So they agreed with Germany and said, yep, let's send him to Germany. So off we went to Germany. So when I think of my childhood, my elementary school years, that's Germany. Our family had a great time in Germany. We loved it. It was supposed to be 3 years. We loved it so much. We extended to a 4th year, and then we extended to a 5th year. You can see we had fun traveling all over. The picture on the top left, that's kind of an iconic one. That's me and my sister picking Edelweiss in the mountains of Austria. So we had fun. We went to every Western Europe country, many of them multiple times. And just that 5 years, we never once came back to the States because we were just having too much fun exploring Europe. And so we loved that. During that time, my German grandparents got to come see us twice, so that was kind of cool. And the second time they came, we actually went to East Germany. My dad wasn't allowed to because he's an American soldier, but the rest of us could go. And so my mom loaded us up in our VW van, and at this point there was 5 kids and her parents, and drove across the border and went to East Germany. So that was super cool. By then, my O'oma had passed away, but I did get to meet my O'opa and stayed in his home and meet relatives that I had never met before. So that was really special and a neat thing. I'd always heard my mom talk about her best friend Christine. That's the one that she was really sad to say goodbye to. And Christine had a son that was between my sister Nicole and I, kind of between our age. So we got to meet him and play with him. And it was the night before we were supposed to leave to go back to West Germany that Christine approached my mom and asked her, "Is there any way that you'd be willing to hide my son in your van and sneak him to West Germany and raise him as your own child?" So when I hear some people say, especially young people who don't know better, I guess, that say communism isn't that bad, tell that to a mom who's willing to give up her son, her only child, so that he can have a better life. That was a hard one for my mom. She wanted to help her, but she also had to think about her own children. If we had been caught at the border trying to sneak out this child, we would have been thrown in jail or worse, or who knows what. And so after praying about it, and my dad wasn't there, she couldn't even talk to him, she talked to me about it. She just felt like she had to tell her that she couldn't do it, and that broke her heart. But like I said, we loved our time in Germany. When we were getting close to being done, we were supposed to finally come back to the United States. My dad came to Nicole and I and asked us, he's like, "I have this idea. What do you think of, instead of going to the States like we've been planning, what if we go to this other country called Iran?" And I'm like in 5th grade at the time. Iran is not in the news. I never heard of it. I didn't know where it was. So he gets these little pamphlet booklets out. He's showing us maps and showing us pictures and stuff. And at this point, we're pretty used to traveling and exploring. So that part sounded great. And then we saw the pictures of the ladies in the black coverings. And my sister and I are like, "We are not wearing those, like no way." And my dad's like, "Don't worry, you'll go to an American school, you won't have to wear those." And we're like, "Okay then, like if we don't have to do that, the rest of it sounds great, we're on board, sure, let's go." And so next thing we know, we're getting new pictures for our passports and our visas and getting lots of shots. And I always had to go first because I was the oldest and had to set the example, and I hated shots. But yeah, we were off to Tehran. Yes.
Which one are you?
I'm in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah. And then my sister on the bottom left is not very happy to have her picture taken. But yeah, so we were leaving behind, like we were used to seeing beautiful cathedrals and castles and having yummy food all over Europe and clean countries and warm, smiley, friendly faces. We went from that to this. To say it was a stark contrast would be an understatement, but I do have to say we loved our time in Iran. We were supposed to be there for 2 years. It was a 2-year assignment. We extended to a 3rd year, so we obviously liked it enough. People were nothing but warm and friendly to us. Never felt any hostility from anybody. When we were there, the Shah was in power. Shah means king, so it was King Pahlavi. He had come into power. His dad had like a coup and then passed it on to him. And he was really trying to westernize and modernize the country, maybe doing it too fast. I think that was part of the problem, that the conservative people didn't like how fast he was doing that. He was also, with his wife especially, very, he gave women a lot of rights that they didn't have before then. So they were now able to have jobs. They were able to go out in public without having to have a male escort. They were not required to wear these coverings. They're called fedoras. They didn't have to wear a fedora. They could if they chose to. Most of my pictures you will see they are wearing them. It probably would have been a little creepy to take pictures of the people without them, but the photos do have a lot of that in there. But it was their choice if they wanted to wear them. Most of the, especially the younger Iranian women, just wore regular clothes, jeans or whatever was in style in the late 70s. But they also could have driver's license, which was kind of new for them. My mom even got a driver's license when we lived there. That was kind of rare, and not too many international people were brave enough to do that, but she did. So he was having a lot of changes. He wasn't perfect. He wanted to be called the Shah and Shah, or King of Kings. If you spoke out against him, you might disappear or something, you know, like, so there was that kind of stuff, but he did do some good things too. But I'll just kind of share some pictures that just show what everyday life, the things that we saw all the time. The fedoras did not have to be pure black in Iran at that time. So especially in the spring, summer, you saw a lot of lighter colors, you see floral prints, things like that.
Did people make their own?
Yeah. The men, you would see, they would just squat on the side of the road. You'd just see a whole bunch of them just squatting all day long, just talking, not working, not doing anything. This guy's smoking his little bubbly, the other guy's drinking some tea or something. And they would just squat there. It was just kind of bizarre. And then after, you know, you squat for a long time, you might have to go to the bathroom, so they just get up and pee against the wall. And you'd see that too. It was not the most sanitary country, not the cleanest place, but yeah, that was just kind of some of the sights that you would see. It was not uncommon to see people just selling fruits and vegetables on the side of the road, to see donkeys, camels going through the street selling stuff or carrying stuff, to see a goat herder or sheep herder going in between the traffic. That was very common. This guy's probably selling some fruit out of the back of his truck that these ladies are buying. Just a typical little grocery store. They would open up the metal like garage door and just sell things out of there, and you see a lady carrying some stuff on her head there. Coca-Cola was very popular. They had a lot of that. So these are the street workers, call them agas, and so the guys on the right, they're the trash collectors, and so they would put the trash in those bins and then take it to the dump to burn. But just some of the street workers. So this is kind of interesting. On the side of the curb, they have these gutters. They called them jubes, and in these jubes there was running water. And so in Iran back then, and I'm sure now, there's a huge difference between the haves and the have-nots. And so the have-nots lived in little shacks, sometimes little cardboard coverings, or just very, very simple, very primitive. And so they didn't have electricity, they didn't have running water. And so you would often see them coming to the jubes and using that as their running water. So you've got this lady here washing her clothes. Up a block, you might see somebody cleaning vegetables or whatever. There might be somebody, you know, splashing water on their face to cool off, or even drinking it. They had a lot of wild dogs, like really big ones. They called them jube dogs, and so they would use that too to drink. But yeah, that was the running water for some of the people that didn't have anything else. So that was kind of very unique. So that's what our family, there's our cute family that first spring, and the one on the left. That's the crazy world that we were now in. This is a cool monument behind us that was in a little park downtown. The Americans, we nicknamed it the Shah's Pants. Don't know what it was really called. I probably could look it up, but yeah, that's what we called it, the Shah's Pants, and we love to go to that park. Back then, Tehran had about 5 million people, so pretty large city. It was surrounded by mountains, and so just like in Salt Lake, those mountains kept the smog and the pollution in. So the picture on the right, like you can see some of the bad air. There is snow on the mountains, so it did snow in Iran, so that's something that a lot of people are surprised to learn.
Is this late 70s?
Yeah.
Is that you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you live in a military base or a
We just lived downtown. I'll show you a picture. But yeah, no military housing there. There's where we lived. Very next slide. Yeah, so we were just in the middle of Tehran. There's a little snow on the ground in this picture. We had that upper apartment was ours. Our landlord lived below us. Doesn't look like that much on the outside, but it was really a beautiful place inside. It was like a 6-bedroom house. When you first go into like some of the nicer homes, you'd have like a big, huge entryway foyer area. They kind of used that as their dining room. And so like everywhere you got the Persian rugs, but then they would throw like tablecloth tapestries on top of it. Kind of like this little one I have here, but like they have huge ones. Put that down to protect the carpets a little bit, and then the women would bring out huge platters of rice, of vegetables, of lamb, and whatever, and they just put that on the floor, and everybody would kind of gather around, and they would just eat there on the floor. So they have a big, huge entryway. Our apartment, we were lucky that we had 2 bathrooms, and especially lucky that one of them was a Western style toilet. The second one is what we call the squatty potty. So as the name implies, you squat to go potty. And so as our family had a whole bunch of girls, we only used that as an emergency. And so most of the time we'd be pounding on the door, let me in, because we didn't want to have to use the squatty potty, but did on occasion. My dad also turned that extra one into a darkroom. He was really, really into photography and developing pictures. So all these black and whites are ones that he took and developed. The colored ones are more of the ones I took. And you can also see there's like a flat roof. All the buildings had flat roofs, and so you could go on top and see views of the city and the mountains and things that way. There's our little station wagon in front. So this is a view outside from our kitchen looking down into the alley. Just got this guy with his camels going door to door, basically ringing the doorbell and seeing who wants to buy some camel manure for your gardens. So typical sites, right? So, and you can see that the road's not really paved in the alley either. Everything is kind of just dirty. But this is our landlord, the Eliassis. They were a cute family. Mr. Eliassi always said Mormons and Muslims are very similar. They love their God. They love their family and have large families, and they don't drink alcohol. And I always thought that was really cute. And I thought, man, wouldn't the world be a better place if we could all find those commonalities like he did? You can see they have 6 beautiful daughters. That was a problem for Mrs. Eliassi. She didn't have a son. So I think she just kept trying and trying until finally number 7, right before we left, she finally got her baby boy and hopefully was done. But Mr. Eliassi, he loved his daughters. He supported them getting an education. He encouraged them to learn English. He taught them to swim in the swimming pool, and he was a kind, loving father to all those cute girls. So he told us he was a banker. And then my mom, maybe with her suspicious mind from East Germany, she started telling me things. She's like, he doesn't keep banker's hours. I'm like, okay. And she's like, yeah, he travels way too much for a banker. So things weren't adding up to her, and she was kind of suspicious of it. And then one day he came to ring our doorbell and said he had been locked out of the downstairs apartment, and can he go through our upstairs to get downstairs? And we're kind of thinking like, how? Like that doesn't make sense. We're pretty high up. And he's like, don't worry about it. I'm good. Just, you can take me back. And so we're like, okay. So on the back of our apartment, we had like a long balcony that went the whole length of the place. But like I said, it was pretty high up. Around the property, there's a brick wall, not too close to the balcony, but that didn't seem to matter. So he just climbed on the other side of the banisters, did this amazing acrobatic like leap from the banisters or the balcony to the wall, and then from the wall down like a big James Bond move or something. And we're just sitting there, my mom turns to me and is like, that is not a banker. So the next time she saw Mrs. Eliassi by herself, she kind of played dumb and it's like, now remind me what your husband does for a living. And she's like, well, he's the personal bodyguard to the Shah. Oh. And she's like, yeah, he's with him all the time. He travels with him. Sometimes he goes in advance because he has to make sure things are safe and secure for him. But yeah, he's the Shah's personal bodyguard. Like, okay, well that makes a little more sense now. One time we were up on the top of the house, and all of a sudden there was these two big cages, like taller than us and really wide. Okay, a little while later, those two cages were filled with pigeons. And we're like, what's with the pigeons? So we asked the girls, like, why do you have pigeons up here? And the girls are like, pigeons, pets. We're like, you have pet pigeons? They're like, yeah, pet pigeons. We're like, oh, that's kind of weird, but a lot of things in Iran are weird. I don't know. So we're like, okay, whatever. And then we saw Mr. Eliassi up there, and he released some of his pigeons, and they'd fly away. And then a little while later, he's up there, and the pigeons are coming back to him, and he's putting them in the cage. Figured out what those pigeons are? Yeah, he's getting messages out. I don't know if it was for the Shah or for himself, but he's got carrier pigeons up there sending secret messages to somebody. I don't know. So that was kind of funny once we kind of figured out what was going on with the pigeons. So, but yeah, really neat, sweet family. So some holidays that are common in Iran. They have some fun holidays, and they have what I like to call like a creepy holiday. So the creepy holiday, Ashura, I think is how you say it, was a holiday that it was to but to remember the martyrdom of Muhammad's grandson. And so in order to do that, the men would go out into the street. So we'd go up on the top of our house and we just like peek like this. My mom didn't want anybody to see these American kids watching them. But the men would go out in the street and kind of parade down the street. They didn't have their shirts on. And they would have like sticks with barbs and little pieces of razor blade on them, or they'd have these chains also with these razor blades, and they'd be beating themselves on the back as they're chanting and drawing blood. And the idea was they were trying to draw blood, to show their sympathy or empathy to when the grandson was killed. They're trying to show they can relate and whatever. So pretty barbaric, pretty gross, but we still had a peek and watch. And I've heard that's been outlawed, I hope. So that was kind of the grosser, creepier holiday. Persian New Year, that was a fun one. We loved Persian New Year. So Persian New Year, or Nowruz, is it's going on right now. It's their countdown to spring. And my one Iranian friend described it as, if you take all the American holidays into one, it's kind of like Persian New Year. And so it's 13 days long, and so that's probably why. So when they count down, kind of like how we count down to New Year's Eve, they count down to the Persian New Year, but instead of counting down to midnight, it's the exact second it starts spring. So that was just a few days ago, and it's like 8:37 or something like that, but they count down to that exact moment that spring starts. And then she said it's kind of like Christmas because we get presents, and it's kind of like Thanksgiving because we have a big feast, and we talk about being thankful for things. It's kind of like Easter because we color eggs. It's kind of like Memorial Day because they have big family picnics in the park. Kind of like 4th of July because there's fireworks. They also do this neat thing, jumping the fire. So they'd make these little bonfires, they'd have them like in their courtyard or in the street, and they would jump over the bonfire. And they had this like chant that they would say when they jumped over it, something about like, I'm giving the fire like the yellow in me, or the illness and the bad stuff. I'm giving that to the fire, and then from the fire I'm taking the red, the warmth and the life. And so they had this little saying that they would say as they jumped over. Probably not wise to do that if you're wearing a shadora. So, but that was kind of fun to see that. As part of their Persian New Year, the half-seen table is like a really big deal. And so the first time you get to do your own half scene is like your coming of age. And so it's kind of like the equivalent of their Christmas tree. And so the one on the left was my friend's, her first table, and the one on the right's her mom's table. So half scene, half means 7. So it's 7 things that start with the letter S in Farsi, in their language. And so, and they're all symbolic. So the 7 things that are required, and then after that you can kind of personalize it, but you always have to have an apple. The apple stands for beauty, including inner beauty. There's always some garlic, that's for physical strength. You'll have some vinegar, that's for age and patience. The spice is the color of the sunrise. There's some dried fruit, that's for love. Money for financial success, and then they have the sprouts for new life. And the sprouts I always thought was kind of fun. On the table you want to have like a pretty decorative thing of sprouts, so maybe you'd have them grow it like a pretty bowl, put a bow around it or something. But people also like to take their sprouts with them all over the place. So they would take like the little square milk cartons and cut the top off, and they put the lentils in there and grow the sprouts, and then they could take that. So you would see taxi drivers or cars going around with the sprouts on the dashboard, or people walking around carrying their sprouts, or when they had their picnics in the park, they'd have their sprouts with them. So the sprouts were kind of a big deal. And then some of the other things that were more personalized, the hyacinths or the daffodils are just to welcome spring. The candles are for enlightenment, eggs for fertility. Her mom had the Quran on there for their religion. The mirror was for self-reflection. And so they would decorate these tables and have them for Persian New Year. You always want your table to face where the sun is rising. But that's one holiday that we really enjoyed watching them celebrate. So they're in the middle of that right now. So a little bit about their language. So you might have noticed I say Iran, it's not Iran. If any newbie showed up at school and said Iran, we would tease them and say, where did you run to? So it's Iran. They speak Farsi. It's similar to Arabic, but it is different. They write right to left. These are their numbers, Yak, Do, Se, Chahar, Panch, Sish, Tap, Tosh, No, Da. And I knew my numbers well because I like to barter for fun things. Their money was the rial. I didn't learn to read their writing, but we picked up some phrases. Halashamashatori means hello, how are you? You say merci for thank you, just like you would in French. Our landlord's mom always would cook these foods that just smelled horrendous, and she'd come up and share them with us. And my mom kept saying, holly hoop, very good. And then the landlord's mom, she just thought that meant, we like it, bring more, and we did not like it. So my mom had to stop saying holly hoop. One favorite word for every American kid was the word for snow. And that's barf. So when it was snowing outside, we'd say, it's barfing outside, and we just thought that was hilarious. So that was a lot of fun. We like to tell our bus drivers, borodege, and that means go faster. And getting to school or doing anything in the traffic in Iran was an adventure. I've tried to tell people about how crazy it is. We've been to, I don't know, Istanbul or other third world countries or places that have crazy traffic. Iran took it to another level. I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but back then it was crazy. They had a few stoplights downtown. I don't know why. Nobody ever paid any attention to them. It literally was just a free-for-all, and you would just go wherever you could and just blast your horn while you're doing it. If the curb looked empty and your lane of your traffic aisles were, not as fast as you wanted, you just go up on the curb and go around them. Sometimes you'd have 3 or 4 lanes going one way, all of a sudden you'd see a couple of cars kind of wiggling, trying to snake up right in the middle of you coming towards you. It really was just a free-for-all and was pretty crazy. That's why I was amazed my mom got a driver's license there and braved it. But so getting to school, let's see if I can find it. So I went to Tehran American School, or TAS at the time. It was the largest overseas American school. And they actually, in the yearbook, had a page, 2 pages, about what the traffic and getting to school was like. So I was just gonna read their definition or description of it. So it said, school seemed peaceful and calm compared to the exhilarating thrill of the bus rides to and from. It was not unusual for students and teachers to walk into class late because the buses had been in a fender bender or rolled into the Jube. Every day on the loudspeaker, they would read this huge long list of the buses that weren't gonna be there on time, because if there was a traffic jam, you could be there for hours. So the schedule for picking up passengers was highly erratic. They were picked up according to the whims and moods of the hysterical Tehran traffic patterns. Passengers knew that it was useless to complain to the drivers, who might show up half an hour late one morning or half an hour early the next day. Riders became used to riding to school with their eyes closed and their bodies held rigid, peeking only to see how nearly they missed the last pedestrian or car or camels or street vendor. The bus riders not only learned to come out of the traffic smiling, but they also learned not to scream during the rides, an accomplishment to be proud of anyone venturing into the streets of Tehran. So that's from the yearbook. But school at TAS was quite fun. Like I said, it was the largest American school overseas.
Why?
Why was it so big?
Yeah, like.
Because there wasn't really other options. So like in Europe, there were,
Yeah, okay.
each base would have their own school. You could go to the local schools. There was a lot of international schools. There wasn't all those options there. So everybody went to that American school. And so like we had this huge elementary school campus. The junior high was right next to it. The high school was a little bit further away, but yeah, huge campus.
So what were some of the jobs of the parents? Like why were?
So we were there. We were there because my dad was a doctor in the Army.
Right.
There was the military presence. There was a lot of people that were there working for the State Department, working at the embassy.
Right.
A lot of people for oil companies. There was a lot of international companies. I remember some board members. They worked for Kodak Film Company. So just all kinds of random things. But yeah, that was pretty much your only option
Okay.
if you spoke English. And so even for like a lot of the international students, that's where they would go. So the school had pretty much every curriculum you could ever imagine that any normal American school would have. For extracurricular activities, they probably had more than any place I've ever been since then. They had tons of different things that they offered there. For sports, normally like here, if you have like a football game, you would play the high school, across town or in the next town. Well, there wasn't an across town or next town, but they had so many kids, they could have 5 or 6 different varsity teams, and each team had their own cheerleaders, and then they had that many JV teams, and then they would just play each other. And that's how big the school was. One thing that was very unique about the school was the bomb threats. We had those on occasion. As a kid, we thought they were fun because it meant we got out of school, right? So they would evacuate us whenever a bomb threat was called in. We'd go up to the football fields that were nearby, and they'd have to call all the buses in. They would take the elementary school kids first because they're cuter and more precious, and us junior high kids were just left waiting up there forever. But so that was kind of unique, but fun times. Let's see. So this is the hospital where my dad worked. Some of the Iranian guards there. So like I said, they didn't have like a military compound like where we had in Germany or most European countries, or even Hill Air Force Base or whatever. We didn't have like a central location for everything. So the people just lived in the city. The hospital was in one location. We had a commissary across town. The schools were, somewhere else. We did have this place called the Golf District we had some offices there, but a lot of it was also more for recreation. So we had like the officers club and pool, had a regular big swimming pool complex for swim lessons. It had a teen center, had places you could get hamburgers and pizza and hot dogs, more your American food. They had like in the summer recreational softball leagues and soccer leagues and all kinds of things like that. They had a lot of classes for kids to teenagers that you could do. So I did like cheerleading classes and macrame and oil painting, and one of my paintings got first prize, so I got $2 for my win, so that was exciting. But so they had a lot of things like that, but everything was like spread out throughout the city. Part of why we were there, the military was there, as the Shah was trying to westernize and modernize the country, that included his military. And so we were there to help train the pilots how to fly and then how to maintain their aircrafts. And so we were there as a support to them doing that. And so they made different training videos, but there's obviously a language barrier. And so this was in the time Happy Days and the Fonz were really popular, and yay. And so in the videos, they would do that, good job, and do the thumbs up. Well, then they learned that's kind of an offensive gesture in Iran. That's kind of the equivalent of flipping somebody off. So they had to scratch those videos and start over. But in Iran, their work day and weekends for different days than what we have. And so we had to adjust that also. So Thursday and Friday were our weekends, and so when we went to church, it's me on the left there, instead of singing the primary song, Saturday's a special day, we sang Thursday's a special day. It's the day you get ready for Friday. And so we went to church on Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, we're back in school. So that was kind of unique at first, but then you get used to it. When we first got there, there was a family who, they had like the bottom floor of an apartment, and then the second floor is where we had sacrament meeting and then Sunday school. Everything else was just kind of scattered around town. So like I went to Beehives in my Beehive advisor's home, and the Mind Maids were in somebody else's home, and the young men are who knows where. And there was one family that had this big, huge house, tons of bedrooms, and so that's where we held primary, because they had, you know, each bedroom could be a classroom or whatever. And I wasn't in primary anymore, but my mom didn't want to leave me alone, so I went with, and I got to babysit the primary teacher's little children that weren't in primary yet, and I actually got paid for that. So I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know if that came out of the budget of the church, or if it was the parents paying for it, or even just my mom. I don't know, I should ask her. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool that I got paid to babysit for primary. After about a year or so after we got there, we had outgrown that space, and so there was a community church that would rent out like time slots to other religions, and so we rented out some time and got to go to that church. I think that's where this picture is. I thought that one was kind of cool because there was a lot of different religions, and so like at Christmas time they had candles and other decorations and stuff that maybe we wouldn't have had like in our chapels, but it was kind of fun to see that. In order to own property, for a church to own property in Iran, you had to be officially recognized by the government as being an official religion. And so it was during our third year that we got that recognition. And we got to get this beautiful building for our church. This was super special. Back then, the members had to raise a portion of the money to pay for the building. I think it was 25%, I'm not really sure, but you had to come up with those funds that were donated from the branch members. And so there was a lot of fundraising. A lot of the men were on a softball team called the Saints. And so my dad, with his photography, he would go to all the other teams and he would take like a team photo, or he would take action shots of them, and then he'd show them the little slides and stuff, and people could order prints, and they loved getting pictures of themselves, you know. And so that's how he got some extra money. There was another family that made the best homemade root beer, and so they would make that and bottle it and bring it to the games and sell it. And so that was always a treat to get their root beer. And so different people did different things like that to come up with the funds. But everybody, you know, chipped in to help clean and paint and get the building ready. I stenciled on the back of the metal chairs the name of our branch, so that we had those ready to go, these fold-up chairs. Like all nice properties there, the backyard had a beautiful swimming pool. And so we were excited, thinking, you know, youth pool parties or branch activities or whatever, until they told us they were filling it in and putting a basketball court. I was so sad. Like, I don't care about a basketball hoop. So that was the only disappointment. But that bottom floor, that's where the sacrament, we had sacrament on the bottom right, and then there was some offices, things like that. On the middle floor, that's where all the classrooms were, and then the upper floor was the mission home. So we did have missionaries on the very left. This is our mission president, Farnsworth. We did have missionaries there. They could not proselyte to the local people, but there was enough international people, Americans and stuff like that, that they were able to teach and stuff. So that was kind of neat. So none of us had family, obviously, that lived there. So this branch became our family. Super, super close-knit group of people. A lot of us took a trip together to go to Israel. My third sister was actually baptized on the Jordan River during that trip, so that was cool. I got to go to youth conference up in the Caspian Sea with the youth. The Relief Society sisters, they started volunteering at the orphanage there. And I thought that just sounded so cool. I wanted to do that. And the ladies, they had this great idea that they were gonna go in, because knew they were gonna be working with like 4 or 5 year olds, and they're gonna have like a preschool for them. And so they got all these supplies ready, and they had color crayons and coloring books and paper and scissors, and they had all these great ideas of what they were gonna do. So they get to the orphanage, and they're given these smocks to put on to cover your clothes, and then they played with the kids for a little bit, and then they would take like a small group, and they took them to like this little room that was gonna be supposed to be like, you know, where they're gonna do their crafting in preschool. As soon as they got in there, those kids just started eating the crayons, breaking the crayons. They had never seen any of these supplies. They didn't know what to do with them. So the ladies are, quickly hide the crayons, make sure the scissors are put away. You know, like, so yeah, they quickly learned. They weren't ready for that. And so, and by the time they were done with the day, it's a good thing they had those smocks on, because the pockets would be like ripped and hanging half off and buttons missing and stuff. Those kids would just climb all over you. They were so excited to see you and play with you. And so I really wanted to go and volunteer and be there. And my mom at first was like, nah, I was like, no, none of the other teenagers are doing it. And I'm like, I don't care. I really, really want to do this. And so finally she said, okay, come summer, you can come with me. And while she had been going before I went, she had met this little boy. So in our family, we had 5 girls and just the one brother. And they met, she met this little boy that she fell in love with. And she couldn't wait for me to meet this little guy. She's like, he is so much like your brother. And she really was seriously thinking of adopting him. And so she wanted me to meet him and see what I thought and get my opinion on it. And so the first day we go, and I get to meet this little kid, and cute, fun kid. All the children, their hair is basically shaved off, buzzed off, to try to combat the lice problem. And so, like, yeah, everybody had just little shaved heads. But I had fun playing with the 4 or 5 year olds. Then we went into the like 2 or 3 year old group to feed them their lunch. Their room just consisted of wall-to-wall mats. Like nobody had like private space. They just all these little mats that they slept on and spent their time there. And we'd go in and feed them, because they didn't know how to feed themselves yet at that point. So we'd feed them this little mush out of these bowls. And there was a couple of cute little girls there I wanted to adopt, but I knew my mom wasn't gonna bring another girl into our house. But then after that was the newborn baby section. And the sisters didn't think I should go in there. They didn't think I could handle it. But I was determined, and I said, no, I want to go. And they warned me about these little babies. They said, if anybody had a baby with a defect, cleft palate, missing limbs, whatever, they would just abandon them. Sometimes just leave them on the street, sometimes on the front of the orphanage, but you know, somehow these babies would be brought in, or just somebody who couldn't afford to take care of them. They said the staff at the orphanage didn't have enough people working there to take care of all these babies, and they also knew the life expectancy was super short. And so these babies would just be swaddled in their bassinets and just lay there all day long. Just rows and rows of these little babies. And when I first walked in, the one thing that you immediately notice, especially after the chaos of playing with the little 4-year-olds, you walked in there and it was complete silence. These little babies are so, they don't even cry anymore. They're just so past that. They don't even make a whimper or anything. But we would go in, and we would just hold these babies and rock them and love them, feed them their little bottles and stuff, so at least once a week that they were loved. There was one little baby that didn't have any arms or any legs, just a little stump of a baby, but just precious, precious little children. So that part was pretty hard every time. But at the end of our day, my mom wanted to stop by the 4 and 5 year olds again and ask me, you know, what did I think about this little guy over there? And I'm like, yeah, he's cute. And she's like, do you know, should we adopt him? Like, what do you think? And I said, well, how do you know it's a boy? And she's like, well, of course it's a boy. Like, you saw him, you played with him. He's just like your brother, and how he acts and his mannerisms. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but how do you really know it's a boy? And I think she's getting a little annoyed with me. And I'm like, you know, really? And just then, this little kid across the room pulls down his pants. I don't know why he did that, but it was not a boy. So my mom was devastated, and there went her dreams of adopting this little guy for my brother to have a brother. So yeah. But a lot of great fun memories of this branch and our time together. So a little bit more about shopping in Iran. Like I mentioned, the commissary is kind of on the other side of town. It's often not very stocked, and so in between you would just go to the local corner store. They have these metal garage doors that they would just open, and it's not really a store you go into. You just kind of stand there in the front and buy whatever. So, you know, this one they've got like some nuts and fruits and dried fruit. Of course, your milk cartons there, sitting in the sun. You know, different things. And so you would just, you know, I need ponge of that, and they would give you whatever. As kids, we used to love to go get their chewing bubble gum. It was as hard as a rock, but it made great bubbles. So that was what I mostly shopped there for. But there's my mom getting something. This is our local bakery. They made the best flatbread, but just like everything else in Iran, everything is dirty and dusty, so your bread probably is too. There's a teeny pebble in it. You just spit it out and keep eating. The rest of it was really good. But yeah, we love their flatbread. Super yummy. They had the best watermelons. They were so good, so fresh. So we would just float them in the pool to kind of keep them cool, but really yummy. They also had the biggest pomegranates, like huge pomegranates with giant seeds. And so when I had my first pomegranate in the US, I was kind of like, what is this little thing? I was kind of disappointed. But so great watermelons and pomegranates there. The shopping in the bazaars was so much fun. We loved them. That's where I got most of these little trinkets and stuff. If you've ever been to one, like we've been to like the one in Isfahan, Istanbul, I think some of the ones now are becoming more like tourist traps, sadly, but this was definitely very, very authentic, and we were often the only white people in there. But super fun, all kinds of fun things. There's me herding my sisters in. I used to love to go, especially loved shopping for gold. That was my favorite thing. And I would barter with the Iranian men, and I knew exactly how many reals that gold chain should be worth or whatever. And we'd go back and forth. They'd say your price, and I'd be like, too high. I'd say my price, and they'd act insulted. We'd go back and forth. If they didn't give me what I want, I just turn to my sister and say, well, let's go to the next place. And then, no, best price, you know. And so my dad would just sit back and laugh and watch me go. And so got a lot of fun gold that way. I've got, this is a gold Pahlavi coin that's got the Shah's face on it, and my name in Farsi on my necklace. But yeah, I had a lot of fun in the bazaars. They were great. It's just some local street scenes. At the time, these mullahs here on the left, we didn't see a whole lot of them with the turbans and the long robes. I think that's probably changed, but back then they were more of a rarity to see. This guy here on the left, he's making an inlaid box, so it's kind of similar. I got like a small one here and also some picture frames that are inlaid. And they used a lot of camel bone to make them, and then they would inlay them with sometimes turquoise, with different woods. Some of them are stained, brass, different things like that, and make really pretty intricate patterns with that. So kind of cool thing that they get there. And this is what we call the Tin Pan Alley. They're making like some of these pots. I'll show you this one. So you can see not the most perfect circle, but they like hammer and chisel and make really intricate designs in them, and the noise was so deafening, like you couldn't hear yourself talk there. But so they made decorative plates. I have a small one somewhere, like this one over here. The small decorative plates. My mom has like a big, huge one above her fireplace. All these other containers, they might use them for cooking, for cleaning, for serving, whatever. But there's my mom with a fun vase that she got. But all kinds of really neat, intricate things out of brass and copper that they would make. I'm just a cool guy there. Of course, the Persian rugs are very famous and popular there. And then you see it in this guy's window. does anybody know what numbers those are? Anybody memorize that chart?
The heart is a 5.
You're right. So it's like 55395. So that's probably his phone number at the start of it. But in his window you see these two. Let's see. So this thing right here, that's a samovar. I have like a little teeny miniature one up here, but most of them were quite large, and that's what they would make their tea in. That they would like heat it on the bottom with coals, and there's like a pipe in the middle that would have the heat go up. So that's what they would use for their tea. So you can see a couple in his windows. But yeah, the Persian rugs, definitely very popular and famous, and kind of fun to watch them make those. They wouldn't let my dad come in since he's a man, but we got to go watch. And then these tapestries, kind of like this little one I have in front. So they're not like a woven tapestry, they're actually stamped. And so you see this guy going around stamping with his blue stamp in a round pattern, and then he'll get another stamp with a different color, and he'll stamp until, you know, you can see this one that's now full with all kinds of different colors. That's how they would make those. So that was really neat to get to see how they made those. And then the guy on the side of the street fixing and cleaning shoes. You'd often see beggars in the street, and that's kind of common. But you can also see some of the pretty colors of the Shedoras patterns, some more beggars. They had if you got outside of the city and went out into the desert, you'd see a lot of nomadic people. Gashgai tribe was the most popular one, so they would live in these tents. They usually would set up kind of close to a river, but they would move around a lot, and they have their donkeys, and they'd have their camel herd and stuff, and they'd live out there. And then sometimes they'd come into the city to like get supplies or trade for things. You could always tell who they were because they wore really bright, beautiful, colorful clothes. So they kind of stood out with their bright clothes, super pretty. And there's some other men that wanted to pose for us. But like I said, they'd be by the river so they could, you know, clean their dishes. They look like they're heading to do some laundry. Here they are by the lake. You see the picture on the left, what she has on the top of her? She's got her tied. Isn't that funny? So pretty hilarious that, you know, these nomadic people have their tied. As I mentioned before, we're surrounded by mountains, so that's me on the left. We did a lot of hiking. This is up to this, what we call the halfway house, so some great hikes up there that we used to do a bit. To get there, you'd have to go over some rivers here and there, and for bridges, they would just throw these big logs across the river and then some sticks across the logs. These are not nailed down. These are not secured in any way. So you can see my sister laughing at my third sister as she's carefully making her way. And then that's my adopted grandpa as he's trying to cross another bridge. So they were an adventure, and kind of scary to cross because they were moving and wiggling. But fun hiking up there. I had great skiing. My dad especially, they had this one ski resort that he'd go to that was like a pretty high level, and they have a nice gondola and stuff. For us kids, we'd go skiing, but we went on a tamer mountain. One thing about the skiing there's no trees anywhere on their mountains. And so the first time when I was at BYU, I had a date take me to go skiing in the Cottonwood Canyon. I see all these trees. I was kind of shocked. I'm like, well, what are these trees doing here? And I'm really supposed to go between the trees? Like, I thought it was crazy. Because this is what I was used to. So, yeah. They didn't have a ski shop, so they would just line up the skis in the snow, and then they'd have, you know, the ski boots. And there's my mom trying to get my younger siblings situated, and my adopted grandpa too. And you would just get your ski equipment right there on the slopes. And me and my sister, we're off. We know what we want and doing. So we'd go on these little rope tows, and so basically it's kind of like this stick, and it has a disc on the bottom, and we just grab the stick and sit on the disc and go up the hill. One of the best things that I wish my dad had taken a picture of, like he literally has thousands of pictures and he missed this one. Sometimes you'd see a lady in the Shedora coming down the ski slope looking like a ghost coming down the mountain. He never got a picture of that. I don't know why, but that was the best. That was so funny when you'd see. It was kind of rare, but it was pretty funny to see. But yeah, we had fun skiing in the winter. Also for fun and entertainment, every year we go up north to the Caspian Sea. You have to go through this mountain pass and get there. And the Caspian Sea is the largest, it's technically a lake, it's the largest lake in the world, but it was called the Caspian Sea because it's so large that it's kind of like a sea. It had waves and stuff. And that's me on the left there walking with two of my sisters. So it borders Iran on one side, and on the other side it borders Russia. And back then Russia was the big enemy, and so we were like, oh, we can see Russia over there. I don't think we could. Looking now at a map, there's no way we saw Russia, but at the time we thought we maybe could, just because we knew they were there. But we'd go up there every summer. There's me watching my dad, supervising him, making some kebabs. But we'd stay in these little cottages, Americans and other international people, and the water's just right there on the edge, and we'd have fun at the Caspian Sea every summer. We also like to travel down south. We'd go to the cities of Isfahan and Shiraz, about 4 or 5 hours down south through the desert. And they're beautiful cities, beautiful mosques, beautiful gardens. They were kind of known as like a cultural area with poets and things like that, and also great shopping and just really pretty. And here's a poet, not a poet, a religious guy giving our family a blessing. So that's me sitting next to him. So he's giving us his blessing. I don't know what he said, but kind of a cool photo. And then near that city is the ancient ruins of Persepolis. And Persepolis was so neat. So it was built around 515 BC by Darius the First, and then his son Xerxes. Anybody recognize those names from the Bible? Anybody know who Xerxes' second wife was? Queen Esther, who saved the Jewish people. So they didn't actually live here, but they would come here usually for Persian New Year and things like that. So it's kind of cool to think Esther might have been walking around here. It was a pretty sprawling place, but when Alexander the Great conquered Persia, he burnt everything to the ground. So anything that was wood was destroyed. So, but still a lot of the carvings were intact and just super and so we had a lot of fun exploring and checking out Persepolis every summer and seeing all the carvings. And then about 13 kilometers from that area were these ancient burial caves that were carved into the mountain. There was 5 of them that were there. This kind of gives perspective of how huge they are. And so they have these panels of carvings on the top and then some down below, and you can see how small the people are. But so Darius the First was buried here. Xerxes was the grandson Artaxerxes, and then Darius the Fourth. So the 5th one didn't have anybody buried in it quite yet, before they were conquered or whatever. But you could kind of climb up around the backside and go up on top, and we'd go exploring up there, and you could find like little shards of pottery and things like that. And so we had fun collecting that, and I wish I had that still, but I'm sure my mom long threw that away. But there's just another panel. That's the Syrian king accepting the friendship ring from somebody. But so it was like a normal summer, our 3rd summer there, that we went down to Isfahan, and then we're supposed to go down to Ephesus afterward, Shiraz afterwards. And we got to Isfahan, and you immediately could sense that something was different in the air. There was just like this energy, and just something felt off. And we got to where we were supposed to be staying and found out that a pizza place that Americans and international people frequented had just been bombed, and 2 people killed there. And so the whole city was kind of up in just chaos, and they were trying to get martial law and curfews and all this kind of stuff. And so the next day when we thought we'd go exploring, like everything was closed down. So there was no going to mosque, no going to the gardens, the bazaars were closed, like everything was completely shut down. So we're like, well, that kind of ruins that vacation, so I guess we're gonna head back home. So we started going home, and we had to go through this town of Qom that was a Shiite, I don't know, it's not really the Mecca, but definitely a stronghold of the Shiite Muslim people. And there's like one street that goes through the town to go in and out. You have to go down that one street. And as we're approaching, we can see that there's demonstrators kind of parading down the middle of the street. And here we are, my parents and 5 American kids, and so my dad told us, he's like, duck down and stay down till I tell you otherwise. And we quickly obeyed. So we duck, he's darker hair and skin, maybe he can pass, but he just gripped that steering wheel and drove through and probably didn't breathe until we made it to the other side. So we saw those like little isolated things. We thought that's only happening down there. We didn't realize it was happening all over the country. My dad in the military, he knew what was going on, but he didn't want to freak us kids out and didn't want us to worry, and so he didn't really tell us much, and so he didn't tell us anything. So that summer was just like a normal summer, going to the Gulf District, doing swim lessons and hanging out with friends and taking, our summer classes at the place, and just a normal fun summer. And then at the end of the summer, we were scheduled to come back to the United States finally. My dad was aerospace medicine flight surgeon, and so he needed to go to San Antonio for a year, but before that, he was supposed to get an advanced master's, and the military said, where do you want to do it? He's like, I can pick anywhere, and they're like, yeah. He's like, well, if I can pick and you're paying, I want to go to Harvard. And so that was the plan. We were going to go to Boston for a year, and before that, we were going to go to Greece. I'd always wanted to go to Greece. My parents had been there. That's like the one country that they had not taken me to that they went to. So it's on my bucket list. I'm excited. We're finally going to Greece. And so the moving vans come, they pack up all of our stuff, they take it. We head to the airport. At this point, it's my dad, my mom is now pregnant with baby number 6, and she's very pregnant, like 6-7 months. And then 5 children from young teen on down. And so we get to the airport, we get everything checked in. We got a lot of luggage with us, because picture, we're going to go to Greece for a few weeks, we're going to go to Boston, we got to live out of our suitcases till we find a place to live. So we got a lot of suitcases. We got everything checked in, we get on the plane. My mom gets very motion sick, so she's already taken her Dramamine. She's ready to crash. We settle in, and they announce that there's a delay. And then they have another delay, and then another delay. And then eventually they come on and they say, yeah, we have mechanical problems that we can't fix. So this flight is canceled, everybody needs to get off, get your stuff. The flight will be rescheduled from a week from now. My mom had already fallen asleep. She wakes up and she thinks we're in Greece at first, and was like, this was a fast flight. Like, no, I'm still in Iran. So we get off the plane. My parents, especially my dad being in the military, he knew what was happening in Iran. He knew how crazy things were getting and how fast they were escalating. And they said, we're not waiting for a week to get out of here. We're getting out of here today. I was not happy with that. I wanted to go to Greece. And they start looking for other flights. There's not another flight to Greece. It's now late in the afternoon. We've got 7 people. We gotta find something. And so they're kind of scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. They finally found a flight that was going to London. I didn't want to go to London. I've already been to London. I want to go to Greece. But we're going to London. And so, but there's some logistical problems. There's a commercial airport, and then there's a military airport. We're at one, we need to get to the other. I've already told you what traffic is like. It's clear on the other side of town, and that flight's taking off fairly soon. We don't have a whole lot of time. So how are we gonna get 7 people and all of our luggage to the other airport in that short of a time? It's not like you're gonna put 2 of your daughters in a taxi and say, hope to see you there, right? So my dad was, with his quick thinking, he called out the hospital. He makes friends with everybody. He was good friends with the Iranian ambulance drivers. And so he called them up and said, hey, got a favor to ask. And they're like, sure, doc, what do you need? And he told them, and before we knew it, they came zooming up with the largest ambulance that they had. We threw all of our luggage, somehow climbed on top of it, and off we went with the lights flashing, sirens going, the whole works. And he just booked it to that other airport. So we get there, pull up, and we could see the plane is still on the tarmac. And we're so excited that we made it, good, everybody get out, hurry, hustle. And we go running up, and my dad shows the passports, and The ambulance driver, they had printed out new tickets for us, and he brought those, and so we got the tickets, got the passports, we show them to the guards. Now when I say guards, I'm not talking about your nice, friendly American TSA guards. These are military soldiers that are high alert. They know their country is falling apart, and they know what's been going on all over the country, and that things, a revolution's starting. They are intense and they are high alert. They've got their machine guns, they've got bullets strapped all over them. They're pretty intense and serious. And so here comes this American family, we show them our stuff, and they are blocking the way. They are not letting us on that plane. And my dad tries to start arguing with them, like he's used to getting his way with his job, used to people obeying him, and they don't care. And he's speaking English, which they probably don't know. They're speaking Farsi, which we don't know that much. There's a lot of pointing and gesturing going on, and we figure out the problem. Our passports have been stamped saying we left the country. And they're like, but you're still here. So how does that work? And no, you're not going anywhere. And the more he argued, the more like, yeah, it wasn't going anywhere. And my mom's looking at that plane knowing it's ready to take off and we need to be on that plane. And so she did the only thing she knew, or I guess was prompted to do. She just reached over and grabbed those passports out of the stunned soldier's hands, grabbed the two little kids, and said to the rest of us, let's go, and off she went. And we just quickly and wisely, okay, and started following her. We walked up the gangplank, they shut that door as we sat down, and off we went. So that was...
But the guards did nothing? Like, what?
I think they were too shocked. I mean, I've talked to my mom about this afterwards, and I'm like, they could have shot us. They could have arrested us, thrown us in jail, or who knows what. I'm like, whatever possessed you? And she's like, I just have this prompting, this feeling to do that. And so she went with it. So, yeah, pretty crazy. And yeah, we just quickly marched right after her. And yeah, pregnant mom and all her kiddos. But so then we had our trip to London. It was fine, and it wasn't Greece, but it was fine. And then we get to Massachusetts, and I start school there. And of course, the first day you have to introduce yourself and say where you're from. And so I say I just came from Iran. The kids were freaking out. They saw more on the news in the U.S. than what I had seen or known, and so they were freaking out that I had just come from there. And so I had to come up to speed pretty quickly. Wasn't too long after we got there that
Hey, what year was that when you started school in Boston?
79. So it wasn't too long after that the Shah fled the country. Luckily our landlord and his family, they made it all out. They left shortly before Shah did. And then later in 79 is when some radical extremists stormed the American embassy and took all those people hostage and held them for 444 days.
Mm-hmm.
That was not the Iran I knew. The Iran I knew were kind and loving people. So that's kind of my escape story. As I've kind of reflected on it, there's two life lessons that I learned from it. One was the decisions my parents made to get us out of there. They couldn't have done it on their own. My dad had the connections to get us on that ambulance to get us to the other airport. My mom didn't have those connections, my dad did. My mom's the one that had the prompting to grab the passports. My dad, he was just gonna argue until he was blue in the face. And then through the Lord helping them and guiding them, like it was that pyramid that, you know, with all three of them working together. You can't do those things on your own. You've got to rely on the Lord and others around you. The other lesson I learned, looking back, at the time I didn't think this, but looking back, I wanted to go to Greece so bad. And I just had these like blinders, this myopic view that like, I want to go to Greece. My parents saw the bigger picture. They knew what was going on. They knew they needed to protect us. And so if that meant to heck with Greece, going to London, they had to make that decision. And I think so many times we're kind of like that with our blinders. We know what's best for us. We know what we want, and we want it now, and this is what we want. But sometimes the Lord has other ideas in store for us and knows better than what we think. And sometimes we just need to trust the Lord And if we do that and put our trust in Him, we'll have an even better, more incredible experience than what we could ever imagine. So that's my thoughts, my testimony of, and my experiences. Is there any last questions? I don't know if I'll have any other answers, but yes.
Did people stop and look at you as Americans when you were out in the markets and doing things like I've been the only white person with brown people, and I'm like,
A little
Really
bit, but
kind of
not
sounds okay.
as much as you would think. Cause like I've been to like China, and everybody even as a grown
wants
adult,
pictures
they
of
want
blonde
pictures
haired
of
kids.
me.
Yeah.
I didn't get that there. When I've been to Africa, the little kids I was working with, they would pinch my skin because they weren't used to white skin. So not as much as you would think, unless I was just oblivious. But like I don't really recall that. Yeah. Anybody else? Any questions? Well, thanks for letting me share this with you.